Welcome to another episode of the Global Investors Podcast. I'm your host, Charles Carillo. Today we have Justin Mosley. He is a United States Naval Veteran who began real estate investing back in 2017 and now focuses on value-add single-family rentals, townhouse development, and boutique hotels specifically tailored around short-term rental properties with a portfolio of properties across the Gulf Coast and Florida. So thank you so much for being on the show today, Justin.
Awesome. Happy to be here, my friend.
So it's great to have you on here. I know you're really shaking here in the short-term rentals. That's what you've been really focusing on. You live we met through a mastermind, I guess, a few years ago, and he lives about 20 minutes away from me here in South Florida. So we were able to connect here face to face once in a while. But so give us a little background of yourself, both personally and professionally, prior to getting involved with real estate investing in general.
Yeah. So grew up in Baltimore. So then grew up in South Florida, although I love it here now. And then end up going into the Navy to get the hell up out of there. Right. So like a lot of guys that come from, my city or just places like it. And ended up with a really great perspective being, fortunate enough to travel, being forward deployed overseas. I was in Japan for quite a bit, and well, we were all over the place from, in Asia, South America. It was really, eye opening and cool just to see the world. So, fast forward, end up coming down to Florida to go to college and, was working in Tampa doing a corporate role. And that's when I realized, like, oh man, like this is soul destroying. But before I really had that true epiphany, I met my, then she wasn't my wife then, but like she is now, working for a job, and immediately fell in love. And I tell this story all the time because, like, she was like, don't get too attached because, like, I'm English. I got to go back to England. I'm only here temporary to help the business expand here in the States. So when it was time for her to go back, I quit my job and went over to England and went to grad school because that was the only way I could get into the country. And from there, that's really when I thought about real estate and what I want my life to look like and my next steps. And when we came back, we settled down in South Florida, and that's where it began.
So with what was the kind of the magnet of real estate and why you chose it as your investment vehicle? There's so many different ways of making money and building wealth out there today.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think for me, it really just boiled down to one. I think real estate has just tangible value or intrinsic value that it just made sense to me, right? Like at the end of the day, right? Like, I went to school for financial economics, and we talk about all these derivative products and the stock market. And at that point, when I was really trying to learn and understand, I quickly realized, one, this stuff's all gypsy magic, right? Like there's, when you talk about stocks and stuff like that, Bitcoin and all that, like I think you can make money in those spaces, but you have literally no control, right? It's really about consumer, how they feel and all that kind of stuff. Where the logical place that it took me was real estate, because you have a level of control over that investment in terms of the amount of income you bring in and all those things. And the second reason, like, owning real estate's cool, right? Like who is, no one's ever ashamed to say, yeah, man, I own a bunch of stuff, right? So so it's kind of like a more complex reason, but then the simple reason was like it just made sense to me, and I love the idea of cash flow, and that's what really kind of piqued my interest and made me jump in.
Yeah, it's a proven investment class for hundreds, if not thousands of years. I mean, it's something that, it's true. You work with family offices, we work with family offices. Anytime they have a large allocation in their portfolio, no matter how they made their money with real estate, no matter how it is. So it's a very interesting thing that you consistently see it over and over again. So you know that you're on the right path. You know what I mean?
For sure.
Yeah. So come on, tell us a little bit about your firm right now, what your current investment strategy is, and what you guys are doing.
Yeah, I think we are unique. There are some other guys doing what we're doing, but I like to think that we're definitely trying to innovate in this space. And I say that because, for one, it's an education thing, right? So there's a real big push for us to get out there and educate people on the value of short-term rentals, right? I think when most people think of short-term rentals, and heck, I mean, I've even talked to real estate guys when I've said STRs, they didn't know what the hell I was talking about, right? So when I say short-term rentals, generally a couple things come up, right? Like, stays less than 6 months, or stays less than 30 days. People tend to think of Airbnb or vacation rentals. And the reality is it's all those things and so much more. So, we really jumped into this space because we believe there's massive opportunity and it will be its own like asset class, 10 years from now. So our real focus has been, finding a niche within the STR space, and what that looks like is, going after really desirable markets where we see kind of the economic development, taking place, finding great locations, and then doing the almost similar to multifamily, right? The force appreciation model, but it's not based off of an NOI and a cap rate, even though we evaluate these properties as such. We're doing it based off of comps. So then once we actually acquire the property, we force appreciate it based off comps, then it's about the operations and really, providing a great experience. And really, at this point in time in 2024, that's where you win in the space. A couple of years ago, you could pretty much throw any property up there and you were going to crush it. But now the game has changed and it's not mature, but we're getting to that spot where you have to be a true operator and even start creating a brand around your properties to be successful in this space.
Yeah, my wife and I stayed in a lot of Airbnbs and VRBOs over the years, and you can just see the quality and kind of what you're thinking when you go into a property too, of what you're expecting, and it's changed greatly since, say, when I don't know, the first time I stayed in one, maybe 2015 or something. So it was like it's been a huge change over the years of how it's gotten more competitive, and it's really, when you're getting good reviews and you're looking at places with good reviews, they're really, if they're done, they're really done well. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's where the opportunity lies, right? Because a part of my thesis has been for I'm sure you have very sophisticated listeners and stuff, right? So back in 2012 or before 2012, single family homes weren't even looked at as a true like asset class, right? Until the Blackstone came in, the private equity money, the America's Home for Rents came up, and now these huge companies own thousands of rentals, right? So we're effectively looking at it from that perspective. But then rather than getting your traditional, $250, $300 a month in cash flow, you need that level of scale to make it advantageous, right? For these businesses. For us, we can buy significantly less properties but have much higher cash flow when you're talking about focusing on those operations. So it's half real estate and half hospitality, and really using that model, that's kind of led us into boutique hotels, smaller operator kind of operations where we can eliminate a lot of that kind of operating expense but create a great experience, use and leverage a lot of technology and processes, but that allows us to really juice up our returns for our investors. So it's been fun, man.
So let's talk about that for a second, because that's something that differs from multifamily, where you're usually hiring a third party property manager, and it's pretty straightforward of a process. There's not a hospitality aspect to the business. So how does management work with your short term rentals or short term rentals in general? And how does that mix of really property management? Because if you're owning the property, you've got your normal property management stuff, and then you also have these clients, these, I wouldn't even say tenants, guests that are really the hospitality place. So, I mean, how do you handle management? I mean, how does that all work?
Yeah, so we have our own property management company, and I'm just a huge advocate of when you are in the hospitality space, because I mean, effectively, that's what STRs are. You have to really have your finger on the pulse of like what's going on, what the experience is for the guests, and for us, it just never made sense to outsource that, right?
Yeah.
And I started off in multifamily, so I'm very familiar with kind of property management on that side. And as well, man. Like a lot of time, these property managers, there are some good ones out there, but the name of the game is volume, right? So they're never going to give your property the care it needs, and that's even when you're not even talking about the hospitality space. So when we look at our own portfolio and we acquire, we are very like deliberate about like how can we make a seamless experience for our guests from the moment they check in to actually before they check in, to how easy is it for them to find the property, what kind of experience are they having, also too like preemptively solving any issues while they're in the stay, because our business is so heavily dependent on the review system, that when you can really provide that great level of service while they're staying there, by the time they get to the review, you're almost always going to get a great review because they feel heard, right? And the difference between us and hospitality, like a true traditional hotel, is we don't need that concierge service where somebody like at a Four Seasons is greeting you, right? I mean, I still stay in Four Seasons, I love it, but at the end of the day, right, like That's not the level that guests expect when they come into an Airbnb, but they do expect it to be easy to check in, that everything looks the way it did on the pictures. There's always towels. Toilet paper is a big one. You'd be shocked on how many times that people get like sunk by just like not having the bare necessities, right? But again, where the opportunity lies is when you're operating like a true business in this space. The overall majority of people within that even own short-term rentals, so we kind of qualify them as like your mom and pop, right? They own less than three. They're not terribly sophisticated. They're not looking at it like a business. So when you come in and look at it through that prism, you're able to be really successful, even when a lot of people are struggling, or it's quote unquote saturated market, because you understand how to kind of target your guests and give them a great stay.
So you have your own management company. You have properties really all over. So how does that work with, how do you manage that? Because I mean, obviously doing a lot of the hospitality portion where it's done virtually, let's say, sending messages to people, sending codes back and forth, handling issues or passing issues back and forth. But how does the on the ground work? So are you buying these strategically like in specific areas that are within miles of each other? But if they're a little bit spread out, how does that work on the actual property management portion of it? Like, someone's toilet's not working or anything that happens in any type of rental property type of situation.
Yeah, we heavily rely on technology, right? You'd be shocked on how many things can be automated very easily, or even ran by a virtual assistant, right? That really understands the business and knows what they're doing. But to your point, we do tend to target areas, one that we like, but also we want to get economies of scale, right? But we also build strategic partners in those markets so that we have teams that are there to be able to service all of those properties, right? So, generally speaking, we're not going to go buy a property just somewhere out, in the middle of nowhere, right? If we're not looking into the future to kind of grow our portfolio there, but we can still do that and just kind of set up that little micro team there to service that property. So it can still be done, and especially if you have investors or listeners that want to get into this business themselves, you can really build small teams and be very opportunistic in just certain locations and just go after where is the most ROI and just build micro teams in those areas, really anywhere in the country where it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, really on the ground, it's really, I would imagine, it's cleaning crew and then some sort of handyman or some sort of person like that
That's
that's
it,
really
man.
doing it. And when I coach people on multifamily, we're like, you have to have like 40 or 60 units at least to have that full-time handyman. I imagine now you can have less than that because your units are more profitable. Is that correct?
Exactly. Exactly. And what it boils down to is cash flow, man. And that's why I'm in this business, and that's why I love it, not only from the opportunity standpoint, but when people actually see the level of cash flow that you can get in this space, it almost it just blows people away, right? But again, it goes back to the education piece. Like, this space hasn't been around terribly long. And so it's really just, educating people to like the opportunity that exists here when you're operating the right way.
Do you have money sitting in the stock market and you're worried about it? Or worse, you have money sitting at the bank, not keeping up with inflation? My name is Charles Carillo, founder and managing partner of Harborside Partners. And since 2006, I've been investing my money and my family's money into income producing properties. These are real assets, real properties with real addresses that produce real cash flow. At Harborside Partners, we provide passive investors who love real estate with a turnkey investing solution. If you want to put your money to work in real estate but can't find deals, don't have the time to get funding, and the last thing that productive people want to do is manage real estate. We find the deals, we fund the deals, and we manage the tenants, the termites, and the properties. Partner with us at investwithharborside.com. That's investwithharborside.com. Go to investwithharborside.com. If you love real estate, you like the idea of passive income, and believe that income producing properties will appreciate over time, go to investwithharborside.com. That's investwithharborside.com. So let's talk about like the scaling. You touched on a little bit about buying different places that you like, and utilizing technology. What other strategies kind of has your team utilized for scaling your short-term rental business over multiple markets at once?
Yeah. So, like I mentioned before, the boutique hotel, I love that model. It's small. You don't need a huge team. It's really more about positioning the properties than anything else, right? One of the things we've been able to leverage is, just distribution channels, right? when generally speaking, most people just pop their properties on Airbnb and VRBO and just like say, all right, wish for the best, right? But there are at least 10 that I can think of at the top of my head that you can put those properties on there and be very strategic, and really make sure that you're maximizing your occupancy and also obviously your average daily rate, right? Another thing is that we're very conscious of the area that we go into is almost like targeting an avatar. So what I mean by that is that every market isn't necessarily going to cater to your kind of vacation traveler, right? There are so many different strategies you can employ, right? So the obvious one is being more midterm, and then building a portfolio around like a hospital. But what a lot of people don't know, it's like going near airports, right? And then actually getting contracts with an airline and having a place for their stewardesses, their pilots to sleep, right? That's very close by, so they can get in somewhere close, go in, be very familiar with the place if it's a hub, and have a great place to stay. And it's a contract, and you're contracting at a premium price, right? So we're using these strategies to really kind of consolidate in certain areas. But another one is the development side. So we really focus in on finding great areas where we can build anywhere from 15 to 30 townhomes, and then that also gives us flexibility to exit at CO because we can control costs of the build, or hold it long term, or sell half the portfolio. So these are the kind of strategy we're deploying so that we can continue to grow and scale this business.
Okay, great. Yeah. When you say CO, that's certificate of occupancy for people that are listening that might not have done development deals before. The thing I think we hear about, and obviously it's news, it's all, gloom, but how does government intervention in certain markets around the US like change your business model? Because obviously you're rolling with the punches, you figure out a way, and sometimes not all government intervention is bad. So it depends on what it is. But tell us about like how that's changed your business. And I mean, you're mostly in the Southeast here. We're pretty friendly to business. So how does that change everything?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is one, um, that's why it becomes incredibly important to really understand the market that you're going into, so that you don't just buy a property in an area that you don't understand and then you get kind of like, sidelined by something like that. But the reality is, the overwhelming majority of that kind of fear mongering and negative news is not nearly as dramatic as most people or the news portrays it to be, right? Again, because this space is so new, a lot of municipalities, states, definitely nothing federal for the most part, or at all, don't have anything on the books when it comes to short-term rentals, right? So they're all playing catch up for a variety of reasons. The tax incentive, right? Anytime government has the ability to tax something and make more money, they're going to do it. Sometimes it is because that neighbor that just is very cranky and doesn't like seeing people come in and out, regardless if they're making noise or not. That can play into local municipalities trying to implement things. But most of the times, it's just about putting kind of guidelines on the books. But you have seen these extreme cases. The New York is a perfect example of when a hotel lobby has a lot of power and they can really like try to completely eliminate the business. So to get back to your point, it becomes really important to make sure that you really understand that market and you're staying pretty plugged into what's going on, right? Even after you buy the property, make sure that you always kind of stay one step ahead, because the good thing about government and the bad thing is they're very slow moving, right? So you have a lot of time generally to prepare for these things. But the best part is the flexibility of the space where you can pivot into different things. One of the really cool things that we're trying now, especially as we're going a little bit higher end, is putting your platform on peer space. And that's something where you can host events or do photo shoots, and you're talking about maybe this property does $600-700 a month, or excuse me, a day ADR to stay in it. But if you could charge $3,000 for 3 hours, that could be a very successful model where you're not violating then the whatever laws they put on the books, right? So what I love about real estate is the ability to be creative. And if you're someone that can be creative and be a forward thinker, like this is a great space because there's so much flexibility that even if you come across a place where they're trying to implement laws, like there's a way that you can pivot. You just have to figure.
Yeah, and a lot of properties like HOAs, and stuff like this, they've had this on the books because I mean, maybe not Airbnbs in their docks, but weekly rentals. Some places have been against it for a while. They have it in there, and some other ones that might be open to it. So, there's a lot of regulation already inside some of these in some of these HOA agreements. But really, when you're buying single family houses, I think that's where you're getting more with getting into the town and really kind of what people and what the lobby is doing there. But it's the thing about your say about New York City. But I mean, that's you got to be aware of that if you're doing business in a state or area like New York. I mean, it's not just STR people that are getting hammered there. I mean, we heard years and years of issues there since COVID with just multifamily investors. You know what I mean? In a place that they really need apartments. So
Yeah.
it just happens in any type of overregulated place like that.
100%, man. And that's just kind of the nature of the beast. And that's just a part of the due diligence process, right? So you just have to be informed and also kind of prepare and give yourself a couple of different exit strategies or, different, preemptively look at like if something does happen, how do we pivot? But, that's government. And, rather than sit around and complain about it, like, figure it out, man. Just tell me what the rules are and we'll figure it out. That's kind of how I operate in life in general, but definitely with my business.
Yeah, that's the entrepreneur mindset. So tell us about I've always wondered how the underwriting process works and avoiding because when I've heard I wouldn't say horror stories when I've heard people that have less than optimal short-term rental properties, they really don't know what they're doing and they might have one. It's usually just one or two. I never hear someone like yourself or someone else that have many different units that are now saying that they're having issues with some because they've kind of figured it out. So, I mean, how do you protect yourself against buying a property or short term rental in an oversaturated market that might have too many short term rentals? And does that stop you from doing it? Does it make it that you have to be more competitive when you go in there? I mean, how does that work when you're reviewing the demographics of an area?
Yeah, we look at it a bunch of different ways, right? So, what I've done is I've leveraged the syndication model from multifamily, and that's kind of how we operate now, right? So we will go out, identify, multiple properties, could be six, could be two, it could be eight, and then package them together, and then we give our investors like a blended return, right? So one, we're kind of geographically diversifying ourselves, right? So if one does struggle a little bit, right, like theoretically, right, from a diversification standpoint, maybe two are doing much better, right? So you're always pretty safe there. But again, it just goes back to your kind of due diligence of making sure that you're buying in the right locations and that you just really understand the market that you're going into to make sure that you're um, one buying the right property, but two, operating the way where you're looking at like how do you optimize the property? How do you make sure that this property is going to be in the top 10%? What we do now is when we target the markets that we like, if it's oversaturated, quote unquote, on the outside looking in, it may just be, two twos are oversaturated, but, properties above five, bedrooms, maybe there's barely any, right? Like 5%, 2%. And that's where we see the opportunity because then we can still go into that market that is, quote unquote, oversaturated. But the reality is that, I'm not going to go to Miami and buy a one bedroom condo because you're talking about massive competition. But if you go to Miami or, like we love Cocoa Beach up in Brevard County, where we see development going in and buy a 5 bedroom and you can convert it to 8 bedrooms, there are very few properties that one have that level of space. And our thesis has been, if you're a family that's a big family, or say you want to travel with your buddy and they have kids and a wife and stuff, you have two options. You can either go to your Holiday Inn and get like six individual hotel rooms, or you can come to one of my properties and you have two kitchens, you have 8 bedrooms, the kids have a place to play in the garage and stuff. So we're effectively like really mitigating a lot of our risk, even in these markets that are quote unquote oversaturated, because we're looking for a particular product that there isn't actually a lot of in that area.
Yeah, I never thought of that. That's fantastic because, how easy it is to. I mean, it's not. I would imagine it's very difficult for somebody else thinking to convert a large property like that into an Airbnb. Number one, there's not going to be many, and no one's going to really build one like that. So, yeah, that makes perfect sense. I never even thought about going into that way, where you're looking at really the unit mix of the properties that you're competing against, and then figuring out where you can kind of fit yourself in there.
Yeah, man, this is what gets me fired up because like this is the problem, man. Like I love this space. I've gone all in. That's a bit of my personality, man. When I figured out this is what I wanted to do. Like I went deep, right? And this is how I've been able to build. But it's just people just aren't aware, right? Like, they think of obviously the negative. I think it's human nature and all the downside. But when you start looking at the true potential and the upside, like there's just massive opportunity in the space. And that's just one strategy of many that you can execute. And it makes it really challenging for your mom and pop to do that, right? When you're going after $2 million properties and in this interest rate environment can get it at a discount and can use financial tools that maybe one individual doesn't have access to, it makes the barrier to entry much higher than it is for your standard 2-2 property in Kansas, where anybody that can qualify for FHA can get into the game.
Yeah. So what are some common mistakes you see short-term rental investors make, since you work with a lot of them?
Yeah. Not doing their due diligence, man. Not buying in the wrong location, not looking at the unit mix, not understanding the seasonality of a property. When you talk about a lot of the negative news that came out of COVID, I think you saw, in markets like a Phoenix or a Joshua Tree, California, where, those are great markets and they still are. But, when you go in, you buy a property when the market's going like this, you're not renovating, you're not adding any value to it. And then you're underwriting the property to where you think that the average daily rate is going to be $1,000 a night because in COVID, you can't travel around, but their true average daily rate is really 500 or 450. And your occupancy truly is 60%, 75%. When rates or I guess when the market comes back down to earth, it left a lot of people upside down. And I think this is a part of the negative news, and this is what people continue to do when they don't truly understand the due diligence process or how to underwrite it. And it was a big reason why I created a community for people that, like, if you want to get into the space, like I can show you how to do it the right way so you don't get burned and you can continue to kind of like buy properties and build your wealth through real estate.
Justin, what are some of the main factors contributing to your success over the years, from, beginning real estate, what you're doing now, and into the future?
Yeah, man, just being too stupid to listen to anybody that tells me that like this isn't a good investment or a good idea, and just being consistent, bro. Like that is a part of my DNA. I have no superpowers, no skills better than the average person, man. But what I will say is I think like I really believe in having a strong mindset, and I believe in discipline. I believe in consistency, and I think that anyone can do those things, man. So if you stay at something long enough and you will do it long enough, like you will win. And I think that's the piece that most people miss. People all the time say they want all these amazing things of life and stuff, but very few people are actually willing to go out and put themselves out there and do it. And I'm just one of those people that chooses to do that.
Yeah, it's a staying power, and I don't think many people have it today, especially in today's kind of how we are today, where everything has to be instant gratification.
Yes, that's very true, man. Yeah.
So, Justin, thank you so much for coming out. Tell us how our listeners can learn more about your investing passively with you, your community, and also all your teaching courses and stuff like this for getting people that want to be active into short-term rentals.
Yeah, so I will leave that to you to put all the links. I'm not going to go through everything like that, man. But at the end of the day, like my program is called STR Millionaire, so you can just Google that and you can find me there if you want to learn and do it yourself. If you want to invest, my company name is Lestermore Capital. It was either the smartest thing or the dumbest thing I ever did, because you won't remember it and you definitely won't spell it correctly. So look for me on Instagram. It's probably the best way, or LinkedIn, Justin C. Mosley, and you'll definitely find me there and reach out. I'd love to chat.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today, Justin, and I'm looking forward to connecting with you here face-to-face sometime in the near future.
Awesome, brother. Yeah, we'll definitely connect soon, my friend.
Talk to you soon.
Hi guys, it's Charles from the Global Investors Podcast. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you're interested in getting involved with real estate but you don't know where to begin, set up a free 30-minute strategy call with me at schedulecharles.com. That's schedulecharles.com. Thank you.
Nothing in this episode should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Any investment opportunities mentioned on this podcast are limited to accredited investors. Any investments will only be made with proper disclosure, subscription documentation, and are subject to all applicable laws. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Syndication Superstars, LLC exclusively.